Never know what you're going to see here at Rooftop Community Church. The documentary film, The World's Strongest Boy, tells the story of young Richard Sandrake. Richard was born on April 15, 1992 in the Ukraine. His father, Pavel, was a martial arts world champion, and his mother, Lena, was an aerobics competitor. And they moved with Richard to the United States in 1994 to train their young 2-year-old toddler as a bodybuilder because, lots of parents do that. And it worked. By age 6, Richard could bench press 180 pounds, about 5 times as much as Pastor Matt can. By age 8, he could bench press 210 pounds. His parents started taking Richard to bodybuilding competitions where he usually stole the show with his boyish charm and admittedly freakish performances. Soon enough, Richard had been given a nickname. He was called Little Hercules. And he was being photographed for magazines, for advertising products, appearing on TV shows, and even in movies. Now, eventually, suspicions arose that Richard was being given anabolic steroids by his parents. Suspicions that were never proven one way or another. Either way, after his father was imprisoned for spousal abuse, Richard stopped training as much and lost some of his world-famous physique. Slowly, he faded from the public eye. Now, he is a quiet student at San Diego State University where he has reduced his workout schedule. He only works out 90 minutes a day, 4 days a week these days, only. Now, it makes sense that Richard might have been taking steroids at the behest of his ultra-competitive parents. 6-year-olds shouldn't and don't normally develop 8-packs. On the other hand, I know of a young boy whose story is even more freakish and unnatural than Richard Sandrake's is. He wasn't in the gym at 2 years old. He wasn't doing weightlifting shows at 8 years old. He didn't necessarily have a great physique as far as we know. But from his earliest days, people noticed a superhuman strength. They could tell there was something unnatural at work within him. He grew up doing amazing feats nobody else could, wooing crowds, winning fans. Soon enough, questions began to arise about where his strength really came from. Maybe it was his ultra-competitive father who knew he was destined for great things. Either way, this boy was far stronger than Richard Sandrake ever was or ever will be, and far more importantly, this baby boy who came in strength and might did not come to amaze crowds with his physique. He came to serve the poor. He came to defeat sin. He came to give people hope. He was, is, always will be the world's strongest boy. Now, every Christmas we celebrate the birth of the world's strongest boy. His name is Jesus. But he goes by another name as well. He goes by the name Mighty God. At least that's how he's introduced to us in the Bible, in Isaiah chapter 9. In the Old Testament book of Isaiah, as we talked about last week, the prophet from Judah is getting rather sick of his nation's leaders. They are weak and feckless and running his nation over a cliff. So the prophet Isaiah looks forward to a future date when God will send a different kind of king. As he writes, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." Now, on Christmas, we celebrate the arrival of this child who would become king. His mother, Mary, named him Jesus, but Isaiah, the prophet, gives the baby to be born some other name possibilities or titles to describe the character of the king to come. Last week, we looked at the first title. You remember it? Wonderful Counselor. The child Isaiah prophesied grew up to become a king who rules with divine wisdom. He is far more than an awesome therapist. This week, we're going to look at the second title the baby Jesus is given. Isaiah calls him Mighty God. Now, the title Mighty God occurs in the Bible in reference to God the Father. The Hebrew for Mighty God is El Gabor. Say it with me. El Gabor. El means God. That's why you see the word El in so many names in the Bible. Israel, Ezekiel, Joel, Daniel, Azrael. Actually, Azrael is the name of the cat from the Smurfs. Just saw that yesterday. The word Gabor means mighty or warrior-like or strong. So El Gabor means warrior God, or as it's usually translated, mighty God. The title refers to God's strength and power in battle. The author of Psalm 50, for example, writes that the mighty one, God the Lord, speaks and summons the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. The psalmist also asks, who is this King of glory, the Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle? Isaiah even uses the phrase later in the book, a remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. And I like this description of God's might in Isaiah chapter 4. The Lord goes out like a mighty man. Like a man of war, he stirs up his zeal, he cries out, he shouts aloud, he shows himself mighty against his foes. I read this verse and I think of Mel Gibson in Braveheart, stirring up his army with his shouting and zealously leading the Scots against Longshanks. This is how God is described in the Old Testament, as the divine warrior who performs mighty deeds. He parts the waters of the Red Sea. He makes walls fall down at a trumpet blast in Joshua. He stops the sun in the sky so the Israelites can mop up their enemies. El Gabor, the mighty God, would flex his muscle and his enemies would melt. Isaiah longed for a return appearance of El Gabor. You see, in Isaiah's day, his people had some pretty stiff enemies and they were engaged in some pretty serious battles. Isaiah wrote in the 8th century before Christ. And at that time in history, they were being pressed from all sides by military opponents. The Assyrian army was breathing down their necks to the north. Their former brothers, the Israelites, and now the Aramites were making their lives difficult to the northwest, and Egypt, oh, Egypt was being a royal pain in their southern regions. Get it? A royal pain in their southern regions. Judah, Isaiah's country, was like a ping pong ball being batted around between warring nations. And what's worse, the kings ruling Isaiah and Judah were so weak and powerless they couldn't handle it. King Uzziah, King Ahaz, King Hezekiah, they were no David, they were no Solomon. Maybe you remember King David. Like William Wallace, now David was a ruler. He could scrabble together an army and defeat any enemy, no matter how large. David was a mighty king. But Uzziah and Ahaz and Hezekiah, the kings Isaiah knew, they were not mighty. They were like Buchanan, Pierce, and Carter. You know who Buchanan, Pierce, and Carter are? American presidents not known for their strength. These were the types of leaders Isaiah and God's people had leading them against very serious foes. Which is why Isaiah desperately looks forward to a different king, one who rules as mighty God himself, one who doesn't let God's people get pushed around, one who could lead them again in battle. Now, probably you know this. But we yearn for this king, too, to come as a mighty God. We may not be defending the promised land from God's enemies. We might not be fighting enemies and armies that want to destroy us. But we know we're fighting enemies more powerful than we can fight successfully. We know we're fighting the devil, our adversary who is actively looking for an opportunity to destroy us and our church. That's actually happening. We're also fighting battles against sin that won't leave us alone, battles against lust and depression and anger and dysfunction and hopelessness that just will not go away. And some of us in the church today actually are fighting for our lives. Maybe you've been following the situation of Egypt's revolution. According to the New York Times and the chaos of the Egyptian revolution, did you know that over 100,000 Coptic Christian families have fled for the borders, fleeing the persecution of the Muslim Brotherhood that is predicted to win the elections and whose leaders have vowed to destroy the Egyptian Christian church? These are real battles we're fighting. battles against our persecutors, battles against the devil, battles against sin, and every single one of these enemies are too big and powerful for us to fight. We're too weak to fight opponents no matter how hard we might try. Our sin is too deeply rooted. Our persecutors are too many. The devil is too smart. He meets us at every turn. We're like the St. Louis Rams. Several weeks ago, I read a column by Brian Burwell, as a columnist for the Post-Dispatch. The Rams had just gotten destroyed by the undefeated Green Bay Packers. If you don't know this, the Packers, how should I say this, are better than the Rams. The Rams have heart and desire, and they want to win. They want to win for their coach, for their city, for themselves. They want to win, but they can't. They're so injury-plagued that they're playing with backups to their backups. Their star quarterback is a bum ankle and is starting to show signs of fatigue. The team never knows if he's going to play. Their star running back is a groin problem, can't cut like he once could. Their number one draft pick from 2 years ago is out for the year with concussion symptoms. No matter how much desire you have or how hard you practice, when you're injured and tired and King Hezekiah is your leader, you're not going to defeat the Green Bay Packers. You're not even going to defeat the Arizona Cardinals. No matter how many attempts you get. And even if you do stitch together a couple victories, it's probably because your opponents lost the game than it is because you won the game. This is how I sometimes feel in the struggle of life. No matter how hard I try, I'm fighting a battle against an enemy much too strong for me. Probably you are too. Who knows what your enemy is? Maybe it's depression. Maybe it's lust. Maybe it's unemployment. Maybe it's unresolved conflict with your spouse. Maybe it's alcohol or financial concerns. Maybe it's family dysfunction or anxiety or health concerns. These are Assyrian armies. These are the Packers. We don't stand a chance. No matter how much we want to win, we're going to lose. We need an El Gabor. Like Isaiah and God's people in the past, we need a divine warrior. This is why, when rumors started leaking out in first century Palestine that the mighty God Isaiah had prophesied had finally come to earth, the people allowed themselves to get a little bit excited. Rumor was that he was named Jesus and had been born in Bethlehem. You know Bethlehem. That's the city of David. That's the city where David was anointed king. Then the rumor was that this mighty God was growing up quietly in Nazareth, the son of a carpenter. Then the rumors were that the Messiah, the mighty God, was building a following in the northern hills of Galilee. This was good news for God's people. Were Isaiah still alive, he would have been pretty excited. The Assyrians were long gone, but they had been replaced by an empire far worse. Do you know what empire it was? Jonathan. The Roman Empire. Everyone say, grrr. Grr. And the Jews were being led by an even worse king than Uzziah, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. They were being led by Herod. They still needed deliverance and didn't have a deliverer. Rumor was, however, that this Messiah, this El Gabor, this Jesus of Nazareth, was the real deal. He could do things nobody else could do. He turned water to wine. He made people walk who couldn't. He healed people of diseases. He walked on water. He fed 5,000 people with a few loaves and fishes. Not even Richard Sandrake could do that. As the rumors went, this Jesus was mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. At the same time, this divine warrior seemed to be a different kind of divine warrior. For example, he carried no sword. One of his followers had made the mistake of wielding a sword. Jesus yelled at him, told him to put it away. He wore no armor. Didn't seem to have much to wear at all. He was more like a homeless man walking around with only the clothes on his back. In terms of being a military recruiter, he wasn't good at that at all. Apparently, Jesus was quite famous for turning people away and spent most of his time with uneducated, untrained fishermen Nor was Jesus much of a military strategist. He didn't talk about warfare and strategy, but talked an awful lot about loving enemies. And as the story unfolds, this Jesus turns out to be a rather pathetic divine warrior altogether. He let himself be captured, didn't put up a fight, watched his most trusted followers scatter, was ignobly executed on a cross. This is our El Gabor. As his followers came to understand, though, Jesus came as a different kind of mighty God. He came as a mighty different type of mighty God. He ruled with a different kind of strength, kind of like Tony Dungy. I know the football metaphors are flying this morning. You know who Tony Dungy is? Tony Dungy is a former coach of and before that, the Buccaneers. Nobody remembers that Tony Dungy, though. He won a Super Bowl with the Colts a few years back. Dungy was known for his quiet demeanor, which you could easily interpret as weak. He didn't seem to be the NFL head coach type. He didn't yell at refs. He didn't drive his players crazy. He didn't throw clipboards. But people were always impressed with Dungy's ability, however, to win football games without the screaming histrionics and strength other coaches were known for. In his book, Quiet Strength, the coach describes how he became a successful coach. He respected his players. He lived as a servant. He kept his priorities straight. He won games by being a different kind of coach. I know Jesus is not a football coach, but my point is that Jesus came as the mighty God, the divine warrior, but he came with a quiet strength. He came as a mighty different kind of mighty God. For example, he came to wage a mighty different kind of struggle. He fought a different kind of enemy. While he was on earth, his followers wanted him to engage the enemies of Israel. They wanted him to wage war against the Romans. Grrr! It's why Peter pulled out his sword in the Garden of Gethsemane and cut off poor Malthus's ear, because they were the enemy. That was who they were struggling against. The Romans. Grrr! But Jesus had no interest in picking fights with the Romans or the Assyrians or now the Muslims or the Packers. Grrr. He spent his time on earth loving those people. He was able to do this because he knew who the enemy was. He knew the Romans are not the enemy. The Packers are not the enemy. The Muslims are not the enemy. The enemy is the enemy. The devil is the enemy. He who hides behind and inside people and makes it look like they are the enemy. It's a ruse. This is why Jesus went around the countryside not rounding up Romans, but exorcising demons. He knew people weren't the enemy. When he met a troublemaker or an opponent, he didn't destroy them or cast them into hell. He didn't get out his sword. He prayed for them. He delivered them from evil. That's why the Apostle Paul writes these famous words. Be strong in the Lord, in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the Packers' scheme. No, devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authority, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. This is our struggle. It's a mighty different type of struggle than we think we have. We think our struggle is with each other. We think our struggle is with the Muslims or the Republicans or the Democrats or with family members, but it's not. It's against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Those are spiritual enemies, and in order to fight against spiritual enemies, you need spiritual weapons. It's why we pray here at Rooftop. What we just did 10 minutes ago with Lori, that's not prayer, that's combat training. It's why we lay hands on one another and pray that God removes the evil from our lives. Jesus came to wage a mighty different kind of struggle. He also came with a mighty different kind of strategy. When the mighty God arrived, I'm sure a lot of people were kind of hoping Jesus would do his thing. All they had known was oppression at the hands of their overlords. All they had known was poverty and sickness and powerlessness. Finally, El Gabor had arrived. What did they expect? Go get him, Jesus. Go get those Romans. Go get those Assyrians. Go get those packers. But Jesus didn't really do that. That wasn't his strategy. What did he say? He said, no, you go get them. You go do the work. Now, he showed them how. He showed them how to love other people. He showed them how to heal them of diseases. But his strategy was not to do this by himself and get all the credit, as much as we might prefer that. Some of his last words on earth are kind of funny, if you think about it. Just before ascending to heaven, he gathered his disciples together, and he says this to them. He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And then he flies up to heaven, and they never see him again. It's kind of funny if you think about it. Jesus has just insisted, I am the most powerful person in the universe. I am the El Gabor. I can do anything. So disciples, I'm going to leave and go up to heaven, and you stay here and do everything with great difficulty that I could do very easily. Imagine their reaction. Interesting plan. Can we propose a different one? How about you stay here and do with great ease what we will invariably do with great difficulty? And imagine Jesus' reaction. No, sorry. God bless. I'll be with you. See ya. We might expect El Gabor to fight the whole battle for us. We might expect El Gabor to handle the Assyrians and the Romans without our help. Take that struggle that you're stuck in right now, that struggle at work or at home. Wouldn't it be nice if it just went away? Wouldn't it be nice if it just went away? It might, but it probably won't. With his power and his authority, Jesus is sending you into the thick of it. This is his strategy, to teach us responsibility and faith and perseverance and to multiply his efforts. Jesus came with a mighty different kind of struggle, a mighty different kind of strategy, and lastly, a mighty different kind of schedule. When Jesus arrived as the mighty God, there was great expectation that he was going to win and wrap up the battle rather quickly. His disciples even thought so. They were always asking, when are you going to wrap this up once and for all? What's your end game? Win, win, win. And at one point, they just put the question to him in Acts. They asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom of Israel? Is this the time? We've been waiting like forever, like 3 years. When are you going to wrap this up? And how does Jesus answer? It's not for you to know the times and the dates the Father has set by his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. In other words, don't worry about the schedule. Just do the work I've given you to do. Be my witnesses. Tell people about me. Go build homes in Mexico. Go out to the ends of the earth. You'll know when things are wrapping up. You'll either wake up in heaven or you'll see me descending on the clouds. It will be obvious one way or another. We get caught up in the win question. We want victory over our enemies, and we want it now. We want victory over our depression, and we want it now. We want victory over our addictions, and we want it now. We want peace with our family, and we want it now. We want freedom from worry, and we want it now. We want financial security, and we want it now. We want healing for our loved ones, and we want it now. Now, hear me very clearly. Jesus gives us the promise of all that and more. By our faith in Christ who rose from the dead, we have the promise of every good thing we've ever dreamed of. when that time begins, it will never stop. Even Isaiah expects this. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. Words cannot express how much we long for the arrival of that kingdom. But those times and dates are none of our business. We have work to do, lives to live, families to serve, neighbors to love, houses to build, demons to exercise, churches to grow, sermons to write, families to raise, battles to fight. So make no mistake, El Gabor is here. The mighty God has arrived, the strongest boy in the world. But like Richard Sandrake, he's a mighty different kind of mighty God with a mighty different strategy, struggle, and schedule. He might not be the mighty God we expected, but he's the mighty God we need. Let's take a moment and pray that we follow him.